There was a man from Cyrene named Simon, walking into the city from the fields. He was the father of Alexander and Rufus. The soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. They led Jesus to the place called Golgotha. Golgotha means the place of the skull. There, they gave him some wine mixed with myrrh, but he refused to drink it. The soldiers nailed Jesus to a cross. Then they divided his clothes among themselves, throwing dice to see who would get what. The soldiers were going out of the city with Jesus. They saw a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry Jesus' cross. They came to the place called Golgotha. Golgotha means the place of the skull. There, the soldiers gave Jesus some wine mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he refused to drink it. The soldiers led Jesus away. At that same time, there was a man from Cyrene named Simon coming into the city from the fields. The soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross and walk behind him. A large crowd followed Jesus. Some of the women were sad and crying. They felt sorry for him. But Jesus turned and said to the women, "Women of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Cry for yourselves and for your children too. The time is coming when people will say, 'The women who cannot have babies are the ones God has blessed.' It's really a blessing that they have no children to care for. Then the people will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us.' They will say to the hills, 'Cover us.' If this can happen to someone who is good, what will happen to those who are guilty?" The soldiers took Jesus. He carried his own cross to a place called the place of the skull. In Aramaic, the name of this place is Golgotha. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they nailed Jesus to the cross. There was a sign with a charge against him written on it. It said, "The King of the Jews." They also nailed 2 criminals to crosses beside Jesus, one on the right and the other on the left. And this showed the full meaning of the scripture that says, "They put him with criminals." People walked by and said bad things to Jesus. They shook their heads and said, "You said you could destroy the temple and build it again in 3 days. So save yourself. Come down from that cross." The leading priests and the teachers of the law were also there. They made fun of Jesus, the same as the other people did. They said to each other, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. If he is really the Messiah, the King of Israel, he should come down from the cross now. When we see this, then we will believe in him." The criminals on the crosses beside Jesus also said bad things to him. The soldiers nailed Jesus to a cross. Then they threw dice to divide his clothes between them. The soldiers stayed there to guard him. They put a sign above his head with a charge against him written on it. "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 criminals were nailed to crosses beside Jesus, one on the right and the other on the left. People walked by and shouted insults at Jesus. They shook their heads and said, "You said you could destroy the temple and build it again in 3 days. So save yourself. Come down from that cross if you really are the Son of God." The leading priests, the teachers of the law, and the older Jewish leaders were also there. They made fun of Jesus the same as the other people did. They said, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. People say he is the King of Israel. If he is the king, he should come down now from the cross. Then we will believe in him. He trusted God, so let God save him now, if God really wants him. He himself said, 'I am the Son of God.'" And in the same way, the criminals on the crosses beside Jesus also insulted him. There were also 2 criminals led out with Jesus to be killed. They were led to a place called the Skull. There, the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross. They also nailed the criminals to crosses beside Jesus, one on the right and the other on the left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing." The soldiers threw dice to divide Jesus' clothes between them. The people stood there watching everything. The Jewish leaders laughed at Jesus. They said, "If he is God's chosen one, the Messiah, then let him save himself. He saved others, didn't he?" Even the soldiers laughed at Jesus and made fun of him. They came and offered him some sour wine. They said, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." At the top of the cross, these words were written, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging there began to shout insults at Jesus. "Aren't you the Messiah? Then save yourself and save us too." But the other criminal stopped him. He said, "You should fear God. All of us will die soon. You and I are guilty. We deserve to die because we did wrong. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you begin ruling as king." Then Jesus said to him, "I promise you, today you will be with me in paradise." There, they nailed Jesus to the cross. They also nailed 2 other men to crosses. They put them on each side of Jesus, with him in the middle. Pilate told them to write a sign and put it on the cross. The sign said, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." The sign was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. Many of the Jews read this sign, because the place where Jesus was nailed to the cross was near the city. The leading Jewish priest said to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews, but write, 'This man said, I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "I will not change what I have written." After the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts. Each soldier got 1 part. They also took his tunic. It was all one piece of cloth woven from top to bottom. So the soldiers said to each other, "We should not tear this into parts. Let's throw lots to see who will get it." This happened to make clear the full meaning of what the scriptures say. "They divided my clothes among them, and they threw lots for what I was wearing." So the soldiers did this. Jesus' mother stood near his cross. Her sister was also standing there with Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Jesus saw his mother. He also saw the follower he loved very much standing there. He said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." Then he said to the follower, "Here is your mother." So after that, this follower took Jesus' mother to live in his home. At noon, the whole country became dark. This darkness continued until 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out loudly, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani." This means, my God, why have you left me alone?" Some of the people standing there heard this. They said, "Listen, he is calling Elijah." One man there ran and got a sponge. He filled the sponge with sour wine and tied it to a stick. Then he used the stick to give the sponge to Jesus to get a drink from it. The man said, "We should wait now and see if Elijah will come to take him down from the cross." Then Jesus cried out loudly and died. When Jesus died, the curtain in the temple was torn into 2 pieces. The tear started at the top and tore all the way to the bottom. The army officer who was standing there in front of the cross saw what happened when Jesus died. The officer said, "This man really was the Son of God." Some women were standing away from the cross watching. Among these women were Mary Magdalene, Salome, and Mary the mother of James and Joses. James was her youngest son. These were the women who had followed Jesus in Galilee and cared for him. Many other women who had come with Jesus to Jerusalem were also there. At noon, the whole country became dark. The darkness continued for 3 hours. About 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out loudly, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani." This means, my God, why have you left me alone?" Some of the people standing there heard this. They said, "He is calling Elijah." Quickly, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled the sponge with sour wine and tied the sponge to a stick. Then he used the stick to give the sponge to Jesus to get a drink from it. But the others said, "Don't bother him. We want to see if Elijah will come to save him." Again, Jesus cried out loudly, and then he died. When Jesus died, the curtain in the temple was torn into 2 pieces. The tear started at the top and tore all the way to the bottom. Also, the earth shook and rocks were broken. The graves opened, and many of God's people who had died were raised from death. They came out of the graves, and after Jesus was raised from death, they went into the holy city, and many people saw them. The army officer and the soldiers guarding Jesus saw this earthquake and everything that happened. They were very afraid and said, "He really was the Son of God." Many women were standing away from the cross, watching. These were the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for him. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of James and John were there. It was about noon, but it turned dark throughout the land until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because the sun stopped shining. The curtain in the temple was torn into 2 pieces. Jesus shouted, "Father, I put my life in your hands." After Jesus said this, he died. The army officer there saw what happened. He praised God, saying, "I know this man was a good man." Many people had come out of the city to see all this. When they saw it, they felt very sorry and left. The people who were close friends of Jesus were there. Also, there were some women who had followed Jesus from Galilee. They all stood far away from the cross and watched these things. Later, Jesus knew that everything had been done. To make the scriptures come true, he said, "I am thirsty." There was a jar full of sour wine there, so the soldiers soaked a sponge in it. They put the sponge on a branch of hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' mouth. When he tasted the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and died. This day was Preparation Day. The next day was a special Sabbath day. The Jewish leaders did not want the bodies to stay on the cross on the Sabbath day, so they asked Pilate to order that the legs of the men be broken, and they asked that the bodies be taken down from the crosses. The soldiers came and broke the legs of the 2 men of the crosses beside Jesus. But when the soldiers came close to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers stuck his spear into Jesus' side. Immediately, blood and water came out. The one who saw this happen was told about it. He told about it so that you also can believe. The things he says are true. He knows that he tells the truth. These things happened to give full meaning to the scriptures that said, "None of his bones will be broken." And people will look at the one they stabbed.